I saw a magnet the other day that said, in order to keep a true perspective on one's importance, everyone should have a dog that worships her and a cat that ignores her. Now, this made me smile until I realized that I only have a dog. So I don't know what that says about me. Maybe that I need to work on humility. We all need people in our lives to help keep us in check. It's so easy to become blind to the blessings around us and instead become bent on wanting more because what we have and who we are just never seems to be enough. One of the biggest reasons I think we're not content with ourselves and our lives and can't recognize our own blessings is that we compare ourselves to other people. Take Facebook, for example. You're perusing through one day and you see photos of what other people are doing in their lives, and you start to think that your life just isn't that exciting. You see that someone else has a cool job and you think that you're not doing that great in your career. You see someone with a more fit body and you start to feel bad about your flab. You see someone who has created this awesome side business and you wonder, gosh, am I not doing enough? You read about people who are traveling the world, learning languages, going to exotic resorts and restaurants, and you wonder why you're not. And worst of all, you see pictures of perfectly behaved kids in perfectly coordinated clothing, and you wonder, what planet are my children from? Facebook, right? When we use it to stay connected to each other, it can be a blessing. But when we use it to compare our lives against the lives of others, it's really a curse. The reality is we live in a competitive and comparative world. And it's just as human nature for all of us to want to compare ourselves to others and know where we stand. Think about the workplace. We may wonder to ourselves, am I making more or less than my colleague? Am I doing more or less than him or her? Or our families, is my mom praising my brother more than me? Or in our marriage, is my partner pulling his or her weight, or am I doing a little bit more here? Or even in our extracurricular activities, why does he always beat me at golf or bridge? Or always get the tryout for the lead part in the musical at school. And look at fantasy football. We even create competitions about competitions so that we're not just watching other people compete on TV, but so that we can compete too. Everything is either a hard and fast competition or at the very least a comparison game. So it's no wonder that we carry this posture into our relationship with God, and certainly into our understanding of church and faith communities. Look at today's parable. On the surface, it seems that Jesus' point is so clear that it needs no interpretation. Don't think too highly of yourself, as this hypocritical Pharisee is, but be like the self-abasing tax collector. In other words, be humble. Here's the thing, though. Whenever a parable seems this clear or simple or straightforward, we've probably missed the mark. Because with Jesus' parables, there's always more than meets the eye. So while there's nothing wrong with the great lesson of being humble, we need to look at these characters a bit more closely to draw a deeper meaning. First, we have the Pharisee. Now, truth be told, he speaks the truth, right? He is indeed righteous. He leads a life that is blameless according to the law. He fasts and he tithes. And in fact, in all likelihood, he probably bears no resemblance to the unsavory characters with which he compares himself. He probably, on the surface, lives a pretty squeaky clean life. So what's his problem? Well, while the Pharisee is right about the kind of life that God is calling him to live, one of generosity through tithing and spiritual practice through fasting, he is confused about the source of that life. For while the Pharisee prays to God, his prayer really is about himself. He doesn't understand the source of his blessing. How do we know this? Well, he despises people that God loves. If he was praying to God, truly, he wouldn't be comparing himself to other people, only to the person that God wanted him to be. It's in comparing himself to the tax collector that he gets confused, spiritually speaking. He doesn't even think of the tax collector's life and what challenges he faces and what he has overcome just to walk into the temple that day. The Pharisee just assumes and then judges and then condescends. That's usually how it goes, right? Even more, the Pharisee fails to recognize that it's because of the blessings in his life that he's able to live the generous and faithful life that he is living. As Ralph Waldo Emerson says, cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you and give thanks continually. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, include all things in your gratitude. You see, the Pharisee's world revolves around what he thinks of himself and probably what others think of him, not around what God thinks of him. It's hard to give generously and gratefully when we're playing the comparison game with others, because we will always fall short, right? We'll judge and say the other person is either giving more or less than us, so maybe we should give more or less. But when we start from a place of simply being grateful to God, our Creator, for the life that we are living, for the joys and the struggles both, then giving begins to come from a place of pure thanksgiving and not from an obligation rooted in pious living. On the other end of things, we have the tax collector. Once again, Jesus upturns our expectations. Unlike the confession from the more well-known tax collector, Zacchaeus, we see no evidence in this passage that the tax collector is repentant or sorry about his behavior. There's no pledge that he's going to leave his employment or pay back all the money that he has taken from people. He doesn't promise a new and better life. There's nothing in that prayer except the simple acknowledgement that he is utterly and entirely dependent on God's mercy. Essentially, the tax collector knows the one thing that the Pharisee does not. His life is God's. His past, present, future, all of them entirely depend upon God's grace and mercy. He's living a life where his own actions and choices prevent him from having the pious record of the Pharisee. But what he does recognize is the gift of God's grace. The blessing that he sees before him is a blessing that's available to all of us all the time, regardless of our life circumstances or our past choices. And that blessing is pure and simply the utterly amazing grace of God. And it is an equalizing blessing for all of us, for we all need it, and we all can't get enough of it. And regardless of who we are or where we've come from or where we're going, God gives it to us. We can be giving all of our income to the church and fasting every day and volunteering for 10 different service organizations. But if we are doing all of that and thinking that it's by our own effort and achievement and never saying to ourselves, "There, but for the grace of God go I," then we've missed Christ entirely. And we're just celebrating ourselves. We could spend a lifetime learning this truth. And in fact, we do. The first trap in this parable is that, the minute you decide to take this parable to heart and be humble like the tax collector, it's pretty hard to not also be grateful that you're not like the Pharisee. And so then the trap has sprung, right? Because even in your professed humbleness, you end up comparing yourself to another, just as the Pharisee is comparing himself to others. The point is, it's not about you, not about your humility or your good deeds. It's about God. But then there's another trap in this parable. And that's to hear in the tax collector's confession an example that we also ought to live our lives fully and entirely aware of our status as a sinner. But the minute you do that, you've also shifted attention away from God's activity to your status. And the trap is sprung again. Once again, it's not about you, not about you being a sinner or a wretch or one who does not deserve or merit God's grace, or however you might want to formulate that shame-based theology that, by the way, is not from Christ, but has really developed from our culture and churches. It's not about you or our sinfulness. It's about God. Our identities can get so easily tied up in what we are supposed to be and how we are supposed to act, when really our identity is simply that everything we are is made in God's image, and everything we have is God's to begin with. This is the place from which we act, not a place of proving who we are to God or anyone else, but a place of responding to God with thanksgiving for who we are and how far we've come and who we are becoming. The Pharisee had an overly optimistic understanding of himself, and the tax collector had an overly pessimistic understanding of himself. How often do we swing to either of these extremes? Taking an overly optimistic view of our lives or a pessimistic view. And in swinging between these two extremes, how can we land on a more balanced note? Well, you see, I think that the point of this parable is for us not to look down on either the Pharisee or the tax collector, but to take the best of both of them and incorporate their understanding of blessing in our lives. The tax collector recognized that the biggest blessing before him was not his accumulated wealth, but the grace and mercy and forgiveness of God. And the Pharisee, while unable to attribute his blessings to God, he could name them. He was able to recognize the blessings in his life and respond to them by doing things like tithing and fasting. Well, what if we were to see the blessings directly before us as easily as the Pharisee did? But instead of patting ourselves on the back for doing so well, we instead dropped to our knees and gave thanks to God for God's overwhelming grace and mercy, as the tax collector did. What if we could name and see our blessings and also name and see and give thanks to the source of our blessings? How would that transform us and our church? Seems pretty simple, of course. I mean, come on, Anne. Our blessings come from God, so we give out of that place. We've heard this before. But as preacher W.T. Perkisser said, it's not what we say about our blessings, but how we use them that is the true measure of thanksgiving. Think of it in this way. In what areas of your life do you experience blessing? Now, in those areas, did you contribute something or give something yourself in order to receive and enjoy those blessings? Like, to have the blessing of a child in your life, you've got to go through the labor of childbirth or the labor of adoption. You've got to spend a lot of money on that child, and you need to endure hard times raising that kid as they rebel, in order to also experience the blissful moments of parenthood, of receiving that unconditional love from your child. You love your child with all your heart, but loving your child is not enough, right? Sacrifice is involved, money is involved, heart and soul and time are involved. Well, the church is no different. If you love what you experience here at Calvary, if you're here today, there's probably a reason. You get something from this place, this community. You meet God here. You're challenged here. You're comforted here. You serve our community through this place, and you are served by this community by having found a place here yourself. Think of something less drastic than the blessing of a child. What about the blessing of a good meal with friends? You had to give something to have that blessing, right? Either you gave time and money to cook the meal that you shared, or you gave time and money to find the restaurant and pay for the food you ordered. You listened to the ups and downs of your friends' weeks, and they in turn listened to the ups and downs of your week. The blessing of that dinner with friends came with a cost. But you never really stopped to count the cost, right? Because it's a blessing. It's not a burden. But money and time were involved. Good friendships take significant investment. The church is the same. Think of the conversations and the communion that we share. The spiritual food that we share around that table. Another example. In order for your child to experience the blessings of being part of a team, hopefully a winning team, but there are many lessons to be learned, and a losing team as well. Well, you pay for that uniform and the sports gear and even for the cost of the league and the transportation to and from games. Well, in order for your child or any child to experience a church that loves them and a place where they learn the stories of the Bible through the nursery and then through church school and children's church and youth mission trips, you give to the church so that those experiences are there for your children. And as a final example, just as you pay for a ticket to see a great concert or a great football game, and are blessed by the music that ignites your imagination or the excitement of the players and energy in a stadium that makes you bleed blue and orange, you might think of coming to worship as an experience that blesses you with uplifting music and inspiring or challenging words and comforting prayers. A place where you feel like you're part of something greater. A place where you come to love Christ a bit more and carry that love into your week with a bit more courage. A place where weekly you're reminded that God loves you. You see, there's nothing wrong with thinking of stewardship season at church as you would think about paying for private lessons to make you better at music, or paying dues to a sports league, or paying for a concert in order to enrich your life. Now, for sure, those of us who have tithed our whole lives long, it works for us to say, but Ann, we give to God because everything we have is from God. And this is true, and of course, this is the ultimate place that we all work our whole lives to get to. But many of you I know haven't grown up in the church or with this understanding. And as my husband often reminds me, he says, Ann, you need to explain to people why they need to pay for church. Thank you, Damon. What blessings do you receive from Calvary? What are they worth to you? And not just to you, but to this community. What are you willing to give to see those blessings continue? What will you contribute to bring about the blessings that benefit us all? You see, the Pharisee is not faulted for the fact that he tithed his income and fasted. In fact, those are things we should celebrate together when we're giving generously and when we're engaged in spiritual practices. But his problem is simply that he compared himself to others, not that he committed to give generously. So this stewardship season, I invite you to not worry about whether you're giving more or less than anyone else, but rather to wonder about whether what you are giving to God through Calvary is more than enough to sustain the ministries that bless you and our community each and every day. Like the Pharisee, we all do great things for God on a regular basis. And like the tax collector, we all have times where we admit that we have messed up and we don't know what we're doing. But beyond comparing the content of their prayers, remember the one to whom they both were praying, God, the one who gives us our life, and the one who calls us to share the good news of that life with others. The playwright Tom Stoppard said, a healthy attitude and a life full of seeing abundant blessings is contagious, but don't wait to catch it from others. Be a carrier yourself. The blessings of God are before us, Calvary. How will we respond? Will we simply receive them, or will we help create new blessings for all to enjoy? Amen.